I had always been the odd one out in my family. Not in an obvious way, of course. There were no open fights or shouting matches, no slammed doors or raised voices, but there was this unspoken tension that hovered around me, like I was just a little too different from everyone else. My family was close-knit, and they liked to keep things within their own bubble. They had this rhythm, this way of being that didn't quite align with who I was. And for the most part, I just rolled with it, because what else could I do? I loved them. They were my family. My parents were the kind of people who saw the world in black and white terms, their opinions often firm and unyielding. There wasn't much room for ambiguity with them. Either you fit into their mold or you didn't. I was always the one who didn't. I wasn't the overachiever they hoped for, the golden child who could never make a mistake. I was the one who tried to make my own way, to carve out something of my own life outside of their expectations. I was never rebellious, but I didn't fall in line either. I did things my own way. I'd spent most of my 20s figuring out how to build a life that was mine, working my way up in a job that I loved, making new friends, and trying to get over the sting of past heartbreaks. But in the back of my mind, there was always this nagging feeling that I was just a little bit of a disappointment to my parents. Maybe that's why I was so quick to please them when I could, even when it wasn't necessarily good for me. Take their annual family trips, for example. We'd always gone on some grand vacation, and while they loved spending quality time together, I always found myself feeling like an afterthought. I knew they loved me, but I could never shake the feeling that my life was secondary to their grand plans. They had this way of making everything about themselves, always coming first in their own world, with me trailing behind them, just trying to keep up. And then there was the issue of my sister Claire. She was everything they ever wanted in a daughter, quiet, obedient, and perfectly in sync with their values. No matter what I did, no matter how many times I tried to please them, Claire was always the one who got the approval. She had this aura of perfection that I couldn't quite match, no matter how hard I tried. It wasn't that I hated her for it, I loved her, but I couldn't help feeling like I was always the backup plan, the spare tire in the family vehicle, only necessary when the real things didn't work out. It wasn't so much that I resented them, though I had moments of frustration. No, what really bothered me was the way my parents were quick to treat me as if my needs and feelings didn't matter, especially when it came to anything that was outside of their carefully crafted world. If I wasn't fitting into their picture-perfect life, I was made to feel like I was doing something wrong. One evening, a few months ago, things hit a new low. Mom and Dad casually mentioned their plans for their 30th anniversary. They were going on a luxurious cruise, and it sounded wonderful. But there was one catch. They didn't have room for me. "We're going to have to keep the guest list small this time," my mom said with a smile, as if I should just accept it without question. "But hey, if you want to contribute to our onboard expenses, that would really help. You know, a little something to make our trip extra special." I stared at her, speechless for a moment. There it was again, the subtle manipulation. They couldn't find space for me on the cruise, but somehow they expected me to foot the bill for their vacation. The whole thing felt wrong on every level. I tried to brush it off at first because, well, that's what I always did. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. They didn't invite me, and now they wanted me to pay for their extravagance. I remember sitting there, listening to them go on about how much they were looking forward to the trip, about how important this anniversary was. They never once asked if I wanted to be part of the celebration, never once considered that I might want to join them, or that maybe, just maybe, I had my own life to tend to. It was always about them, and I was just supposed to be okay with that. The worst part wasn't even the uninviting. It wasn't the request for money. It was the way they acted like it was no big deal, like I should just be grateful for whatever crumbs they tossed my way. They didn't even bother to hide their disappointment when I didn't fall over myself to comply. The whole thing stung more than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about the cruise, it was about how they had never really seen me, at least, not in the way that mattered, I was always the background character in their story, never the lead. I sat quietly for the rest of the evening, the words of their request echoing in my head. The sense of being taken for granted grew heavier and heavier with every passing minute. And then it hit me. If they didn't have room for me in their lives, why should I have room for them in mine? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I could still hear my mom's voice echoing in my mind. "We don't have space for you, but please send money for our onboard expenses." The request was wrapped up in sweetness, as if it was some small favor, but I could see right through it. The audacity. How could they be so casual about treating me like this? I wasn't just some extra piece in their lives, someone to be ignored when it wasn't convenient, and then called upon when they needed something. I tried to brush it off. Really, I did. I convinced myself it wasn't worth getting upset over. They were my parents, after all. They were just doing what they always did, thinking of themselves first and leaving me to play the role of dutiful daughter when they needed something. But even as I tried to talk myself down, I kept coming back to one thing. This wasn't just about the cruise. It wasn't just about them going off and celebrating their anniversary without me. It was about a pattern, a life where I was always second, always good enough, when I followed their rules, but never truly seen for who I was. The next morning, I woke up with the same heavy feeling sitting in my chest. I couldn't shake the thought. It felt like I was trapped in a cage made of guilt and resentment, with no way out. I didn't want to give them the money. I didn't want to be the backup plan anymore, the last-minute fix for their perfect vacation. But I also couldn't deny the part of me that still wanted to please them. The part of me that thought, maybe if I just do this one thing, they'll finally see me. But I wasn't a little girl anymore. I didn't have to bend to their whims. I didn't have to take this, no matter how deeply they tried to guilt-trip me into it. That's when it hit me, the one thing that would make everything right, or at least make me feel right. I didn't have to give them the money. I could keep it for myself, spend it on something I wanted, something that was just for me. They had asked me to send money after all their money, not a loan or a gift. They expected me to contribute to their lavish anniversary cruise without even asking if I was okay with the idea of being excluded. I could take that money and turn it into something that was all about me, for once. A vacation, an escape, a chance to stop living under their shadow. I remember sitting at my desk, looking at my bank account, the numbers staring back at me. I knew what I had to do. I could almost hear their voices in my head, telling me I was selfish, ungrateful. But I didn't care. They'd done enough to me over the years. They'd taken more than enough. Now, it was my turn. I booked the trip that day. A solo vacation, somewhere quiet and far away. A beach maybe, or a little city I could explore on my own. I didn't tell anyone, not a soul. I just let the idea of it grow in my mind, like a spark that I refused to extinguish. The idea of taking that money, their money, and doing something for myself was the first moment in a long time that felt like freedom. It was a small rebellion, but it was enough to make me feel like I had some control over my own life. For the next few days, I didn't hear from my parents about the money. They were busy getting ready for their trip, and I was busy getting ready for mine. But I knew the moment they would realize I hadn't sent them anything. And sure enough, it happened the night before they were set to leave. Mom called me, sounding sweet, almost syrupy. "Hey, honey, just wanted to remind you about the money for our cruise," she said, as if we hadn't already discussed it. "We're so excited about the trip. I know it's a lot to ask, but a little contribution would really help us out." Her tone was too casual, like nothing had changed, like it was all still the same. I didn't answer right away. I could feel my heart racing, the tightness in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had already made up my mind. I wasn't giving them a dime, not this time. "Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me, "I'm not sending you any money for the trip." There was silence on the other end of the line, just a quiet pause that made my stomach twist. I could hear the confusion in her voice as she processed what I'd said. "What do you mean? You said you would—" I changed my mind, I interrupted. I don't think I should be expected to pay for your vacation when you didn't even invite me. You didn't have space for me on the trip, but somehow you think I should help pay for it? Her voice wavered, a touch of irritation creeping in. That's not fair. We're your parents. It's just a small gesture, nothing more. You don't understand how much it means to us. Maybe I don't, I said, cutting her off again. But I'm not going to be treated like an afterthought anymore. I've spent my whole life trying to make you proud, and it's never enough. I'm done with it. There was another long silence, and I could almost hear her trying to figure out what to say. I'm really disappointed in you, she finally muttered, her tone sharp. You know, we're not asking for much. Maybe not, I said, my voice softening but still firm, but it's too much for me. And with that, I hung up. I sat in the silence that followed, feeling a mix of relief and dread. I had just made the choice to put myself first, to stand up for myself, and I knew that from this point on, things between my parents and me would never be the same. The days after the phone call felt surreal. It was as if I had crossed an invisible line, one I didn't even realize existed until I stepped over it. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, wondering if I'd made the right choice. Had I been too harsh? Was I being selfish? The familiar guilt crept in, the voice inside me whispering that maybe I should have just sent the money, maybe I should have just played along like I always did. But another part of me, the part that had been quiet for so long, was finally speaking up, and it felt good. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't holding myself back. I spent the next few days with an uneasy sense of freedom. I had booked my trip, the solo vacation I'd dreamed of for months, a place where I could just exist without any expectations, without anyone needing something from me. I didn't even tell my friends, just letting the excitement of it all build quietly inside me. I kept reminding myself that I wasn't being unreasonable, that I had every right to take a stand. But as the days ticked by, the texts started coming. First, it was my dad. His message was simple. Hope you're doing well. Just wanted to remind you that your mom and I are counting on that money. It's a shame you're being like this. We expected better. It stung, the way he worded it, as if my refusal was a betrayal. I stared at the message for a few minutes before replying, my fingers hovering over the screen. I knew if I answered too quickly, I'd be giving in. I wanted them to understand, but I didn't want to get sucked back into their manipulative cycle. So I let the message sit for a while, my mind whirring with thoughts of how best to respond. Finally, I typed, I'm not sending the money, Dad. I'm spending it on myself. I hope you have a great time, but I'm done with this. The reply came almost immediately. You're being childish. It's not about the money, it's about respect. But I guess that doesn't matter to you. That was the moment I realized they wouldn't understand. It wasn't just about the money, it was about control. They wanted to keep me in my place, always giving, always sacrificing, always bending to their will. And I had finally had enough. The next day, my mom texted me, her words more pointed. I can't believe you're doing this to us. You don't even care about your father and me. We thought you'd support us. And this is how you repay us? We're your parents. I could feel the guilt creeping in again, but I pushed it down, buried it under the weight of my decision. I wasn't going to let them make me feel like a villain for standing up for myself, and I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into being the one who always gave and never got anything in return. As the cruise date drew closer, the pressure mounted. I could feel it from every angle. My phone rang more frequently now. At first, I let the calls go to voicemail. I knew what they wanted, but after a few days, the calls started to feel more desperate, as if they knew they had lost control over me. I knew they were worried about the consequences of me pulling away, but they didn't know what it was like to feel invisible, to always be the one who had to sacrifice for everyone else's happiness while mine was left to wither. One afternoon, just days before their cruise, I picked up the phone. It was my mom, her voice thick with emotion. Honey, please, I'm begging you. This isn't like you. You've always been so thoughtful, so kind. Why are you doing this? Her voice cracked at the end of the sentence, and for a moment I almost caved. The guilt rushed back in full force, but I shook my head even though she couldn't see me and took a deep breath. I had to stay strong. Mom, this isn't about being kind. It's about me finally putting myself first for once. I'm tired of being treated like I'm not important. You didn't even want me on the trip. You can't just expect me to pay for it after that. I'm done with that. She was silent for a long time. I could hear her breathing on the other end, the faint sound of her trying to find the words that would make me change my mind. Finally, she spoke, her voice cold. I guess this is who you are now, huh? Fine. We'll see how you feel when we're gone. We were just trying to help you, but you've made your choice. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the knot in my stomach tightening, but I wasn't going to back down, not this time. Goodbye, Mom, I said firmly, and before she could say anything more, I ended the call. The next few days were a blur. I packed for my trip, the one that was meant to be an escape, a chance to recharge, but there was an underlying tension to everything now. Every time I looked at my phone, I knew there was a message waiting for me or a missed call from one of them. I couldn't stop myself from checking, though, and sure enough, the messages kept coming. They were relentless, each one more hurtful than the last. This is the last time we'll ask you for anything. You're ungrateful. I can't believe you're treating us this way. You've really shown us who you are. They didn't get it. They didn't see what they were doing. The more they pushed, the more I realized I was doing the right thing. My trip, my decision to stand firm, it wasn't just about the money. It was about taking back my life. It was about finally drawing a line in the sand and saying, I am not your doormat anymore. When the day of their departure finally came, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I had made it through the worst of the emotional manipulation. I knew that the worst was yet to come, that the backlash would hit when they returned, but I was ready. I was already stronger than I'd been in years. Their words didn't have the power over me they once did. I was going to enjoy my vacation. I was going to savor every moment of it, and when they came back, angry and disappointed, I would be ready. I wasn't going to let them guilt me anymore. Not now, not ever. The first few days of my solo trip felt like pure freedom. The constant noise in my head, the worry over what my parents would say, the guilt that had lived in my chest for so long, all of it started to fade away the moment I stepped off the plane. I'd chosen a quiet coastal town, a place where the ocean met the sky in endless shades of blue, a place where no one knew my name. I didn't have to be anyone here. I didn't have to answer to anyone. I could just exist. I spent my mornings sipping coffee by the water, watching the sun rise over the horizon, and my afternoons wandering aimlessly, exploring hidden shops and quiet streets. The days stretched out in a way they never had before, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I even treated myself to a massage, something I would have never done before, always saving my money for everyone else. But this time, I was putting myself first. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging thought in the back of my mind. How would they react when they found out I hadn't sent the money? It didn't take long for the storm to hit. 3 days into my trip, I received a message from my dad. It was short, but sharp. You've ruined everything. You're selfish, and you've embarrassed us. You won't hear from us again. I stared at the message, my stomach tightening. There was a part of me that still wanted to explain, to make them understand why I'd done it, but then I remembered. They wouldn't listen. They never had. Every time I'd tried to talk to them, to stand up for myself, it had always ended with them manipulating the situation to make me feel guilty. This time was different. I wasn't going to let them do that to me again. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. A few hours later, my phone buzzed again. It was my mom. I can't believe you're doing this to us. You've destroyed everything. We were trying to have a nice trip, and you couldn't even be bothered to support us. I don't know what happened to you. Her words stung, but there was a cold, detached part of me that refused to let the guilt take root. I had made my choice, and there was no going back now. I had learned long ago that pleasing them never made me happy. The more I gave, the more they took. No amount of sacrifice on my part was ever going to make them love or respect me the way I deserved. I was still staring at the message when the phone rang again. This time, it was my dad. I took a deep breath before answering. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. "You know exactly what we want," he snapped. "You need to make this right. You've embarrassed us in front of everyone. All we wanted was a little help, and you decided to turn your back on us." "I didn't turn my back on you," I said, my voice growing sharper. "You didn't invite me on the trip. You didn't make room for me. You didn't even consider me, and now you're asking me to fund your vacation? That's not how it works. I'm not some backup plan you can call on when it's convenient for you." He was silent for a moment, and I could feel the tension building. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low and thick with anger. "You're being childish. You're acting like we owe you something. You're our daughter, and you're acting like this." "I'm acting like this because I finally realized that you don't see me. You never have. I've spent my entire life trying to make you proud, trying to do what you wanted, and it's never been enough. You only care about what you want. Well, I'm done." There was a pause, and then he let out a bitter laugh. "Fine. If this is how you want to be, then we're done with you. You're no daughter of ours." The words hit harder than I expected. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I refused to let the tears fall. I had been waiting for this moment, waiting for them to finally show their true colors. They'd always used guilt to control me, always made me feel like I owed them something, but not anymore. "Goodbye, Dad," I said, my voice unwavering. I hung up before he could say anything else, and for a moment I just sat there, letting the silence wash over me. I felt numb, but there was no regret. I had done what I needed to do. I had taken control of my own life, for the first time in a long time. Later that evening, as I sat on the balcony of my hotel room, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of my parents' disappointment. I wasn't afraid of their anger. They had always held the power over me, manipulating me, making me feel small, but now I was free. Free from their control, free from their expectations, free from the constant pressure to please them. And just like that, the weight I had carried for so long began to lift. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to sacrifice my happiness for theirs. I was allowed to exist for myself. For the first time, I truly understood what it meant to live for me, not for them. The next day, I woke up early, packed my things, and headed to the beach. The cool breeze brushed against my face as I walked along the shoreline, the sound of the waves crashing against the sand filling my ears. It was peaceful. It was exactly what I needed. As I stood there, looking out over the vast expanse of water, I couldn't help but smile. I had done it. I had chosen myself over them, and for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of that choice. When they returned from their trip, I knew they would be furious. They would probably call me again, shout at me, accuse me of everything under the sun. But none of it would matter. I had already won. I had taken my power back, and nothing they said could take that away from me. It was over. I stayed on the coast for another week. The trip was everything I needed and more time alone, time to think, time to heal. There was something so quiet about the place that I didn't even feel the urge to check my phone, to worry about what my parents might be saying behind my back. The messages kept coming, but I had long since stopped reading them. The last one I saw before I turned off my phone entirely read, "You've really ruined everything. We will never forgive you." But in that moment, it didn't even sting. I was done. When I returned home, it felt like nothing had changed. The house was the same, the air was still thick with that same familiar tension, but something inside me had shifted. I had spent so many years living under the shadow of my parents' expectations, walking on eggshells, always trying to please them, trying to prove that I was good enough, but now I was free. I knew that the hardest part of all this was behind me. No matter what they said or did, I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let them dictate how I lived my life anymore. A few days after I got home, the inevitable happened. My phone rang late in the evening, and I knew immediately who it was. I'd been expecting this call, the one where they'd demand to be heard, the one where they'd try to guilt-trip me back into their world. I almost didn't pick up, but I had made my peace. I had to hear them out, once and for all. "Hello?" I said, my voice steady but distant. "Where have you been?" My mom's voice came through the line, clipped and sharp. "You've been avoiding us. You think we don't know what you're doing?" "I haven't been avoiding you," I replied, trying not to let her irritation rattle me. "I've just been living my life." "I can't believe this," she continued, her voice rising. "You threw us aside like we meant nothing to you. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" I felt my heart skip a beat, but I didn't let it show. "I didn't throw you aside, Mom. I made a choice. I'm allowed to make choices for myself." "You're being selfish," she snapped. "You've destroyed our family. Your father is heartbroken. You've embarrassed us. I can't even begin to understand why you're acting this way." There it was, the manipulation. The same old tactic. I had been expecting it, but hearing it again still hit hard. I had to fight to keep my voice calm. "I didn't destroy anything. I simply decided I wouldn't give you money after you excluded me from your trip. I didn't think it was fair. I wasn't going to let you treat me like an afterthought and then still expect me to pay for your vacation. That's not how relationships work. That's not how respect works." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could feel her processing my words, and for the first time in our conversation, she didn't have an immediate response. "I never expected this from you," she finally said, her voice quieter now, tinged with disappointment. "I thought you understood the importance of family, but I guess you don't." I swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to defend myself, to say something that would make her see things my way. But I knew I couldn't change her mind. Not now. Not after all these years. "I understand the importance of family," I said, my voice firm, "but I also understand the importance of me. And I can't keep living my life trying to make you happy at my own expense. I've done that for too long, and it's not healthy for me anymore. I'm sorry you're upset, but I'm not sorry for what I did." She didn't say anything for a long time after that. I thought maybe she was finally getting it. Maybe she understood that I wasn't backing down this time. But then her voice came through, small and sad. "You've really changed, and I don't know if I can forgive you for this." It was like a weight lifted off me. I had expected this. I had anticipated it. The moment I stopped playing the part of the dutiful daughter, the moment I stopped being the one who always gave, this was the consequence. But I was okay with it now. I wasn't going to beg for their forgiveness. I wasn't going to apologize for putting myself first. "I don't need you to forgive me," I said, my voice resolute. "I just need you to understand that I have to live my own life. I need to be able to do that without feeling guilty about it." There was another long pause, and then I heard her take a deep breath. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told her softly. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. And I need you to respect that." I don't know if I can," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought we were close. I thought you'd always be there for us." "I'll always love you, Mom," I said, feeling the weight of her disappointment like a cold stone in my chest. "But I can't be there in the way you want me to be, not anymore." And with that, I ended the call. The silence that followed felt like freedom. I had stood up for myself in a way I never had before, and for the first time, I didn't feel bad about it. Sure, my parents were angry. Sure, they didn't understand. But I wasn't going to let their anger dictate my happiness. I wasn't going to let their disappointment define me anymore. A few days passed without any more calls from them. I felt the tension in the air, but I didn't break. I kept living my life. I worked, I socialized, I enjoyed my newfound independence. I was no longer defined by their expectations. I was learning to live for myself, and it felt incredible. I didn't know what the future held for my relationship with my parents. Maybe they'd come around. Maybe they wouldn't. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that uncertainty. I had found peace in making the hardest decision of my life, and no matter how they reacted, I knew I was doing the right thing for me. I had finally found my voice, and no one could take that away from me.